A pleasure to meet all at last. Welcome back to Films I'm Willing to Talk About Again. Today we're going to talk about a film that came out in the year 2000. So, a few steps ahead of Dragonheart entirely. But it's basically a Tom Hanks film. A Tom Hanks film that, believe it or not, was actually made free to watch on YouTube. So, I went ahead and took up the opportunity to watch Cast Away once again, specifically for the entirety of this video. And so I considered this a good opportunity for me to be able to try this out, because I feel like that this would have been a part of a video a long time ago, but I feel like that by this point it should at least be implemented within this series. So the film, again, centers mainly around actor Tom Hanks, a man whom has, in fact, had a huge career throughout the 80s and 90s. With such films out there like Sleepless in Seattle, Forrest Gump, Toy Story, Turner and Hooch, and The Money Pit, it's no surprise that Cast Away would pretty much involve the likes of Hanks himself. This was also a film that, believe it or not, was made possible by the likes of director Robert Zemeckis, whom was also responsible for Forrest Gump, and later on would also be famous alongside Tom Hanks for creating The Polar Express. Yeah, that was yet another book adaptation. I'll probably get to that some other time. But in any case though, Cast Away was basically a thing in between the likes of Forrest Gump and The Polar Express. What you might call the missing link, in a way. To go from the likes of live action to animation. Maybe not that much of a missing link, because it probably wouldn't make too much sense. But anyways, Tom Hanks plays a man known by the name of Chuck Noland. A man whom has in fact played for various things. A man whom is in fact responsible for allowing the company of FedEx. So this one's a no-brainer. I mean, this has two big connections in life. The name Noland literally refers to someone in my life whom has helped make this content possible. Thank you very much, my man. And then of course, FedEx. That's a company I've literally been known to work with lots of times. Anyways though, Chuck Noland is a man behind the likes of FedEx and responsible for the likes of the Russian division of FedEx entirely. From what we see, at least within the first 10 minutes or so, the character of Chuck Noland basically makes his first appearance in a small warehouse where he is instructing a group of workers within the facility itself, alongside an interpreter whom of course has to translate it to Russian for the workers to understand. He gives them the time limit of 3 hours and 4 minutes. I guess today's not really my day to do this kind of stuff very much, but anyways, 3 hours, 4 minutes is the time limit that they have to establish in order to fill up the entirety of a large trailer full of packages that need to be delivered all around to the small township of Nikolaev, Russia. And it just so happens, a young boy was actually able to deliver a package directly to Chuck, rewarding him with the likes of a Snickers bar and a CD player, as well as some Elvis Presley to cover for that whole thing. But the entirety of that package that was given to Chuck was basically a clock that he mailed to himself, all the way from Memphis, Tennessee. Yeah, he went all the way from Memphis to Nikolaev and then basically shipped a package to himself. This clock stops at the likes of 87 hours. Now that's a little more than 3.5 days worth of time that has passed since the package was shipped. And so, it's considered outrageous by his standards. He intends to not lose track of time and also establish a good big record when it comes to fast delivery. After all, Federal Express has been well known for the likes of worldwide international travel when it comes to package delivery. And it does account for a pretty high percentage in terms of package delivery rates, as opposed to most other competitors like Amazon, DHL, USPS, and others. The thing is though, in terms of what Chuck himself has to piece together in order to get his work done correctly, is simply the fact that he wants to get everything done ASAP. And once he gets done with all of his business, he thankfully is able to come around for a flight that will actually take him home in time for the holidays. Yeah, basically, the holidays of 1995 this takes place in, not 2000. Because I'll get back to that subject in a little bit and explain why. Anyways though, Chuck was able to find a plane that'll help take him back home through the means of FedEx air transportation. Yeah, imagine if I got to transfer between facilities by using one of their cargo planes to get to and from these locations. Anyways though, he actually gets himself a small talk with his wife, whom is of course waiting for him at home. After he gets off the phone, he basically allows for the likes of other people to take care of the business at hand while he tries to go back home and celebrate the holidays with his wife. Basically, you would think by this point he actually has it easy. The way there though, some problem happens to be up there in the atmosphere, but he tends to shake it off. But eventually he goes up to the cockpit to try and see what is going on. Little does he realize a massive storm is underway. And when it happens, this actually causes the plane to go out of control. Essentially, the turbulence becomes so big combined with that of the storm's massive surging throughout the air. The plane ends up going out of control, its engines practically get shot, and it falls directly into the ocean. Yeah. The entirety of that plane wreck is unbelievable. Even today, I still can't quite believe how impressive the whole thing looks. For them to go all the way out into the ocean to film this whole thing, that's just awesome. I can't really find out that many other things out there. There, of course, was that scene in Life of Pi in 2012, which also is a different story that I do plan on bringing on through this series. Someday, at least. But anyways, Chuck Noland is actually able to escape from the likes of the aircraft and manage to find a life vessel. This raft will actually help him survive throughout the waters until eventually it hits shore. And he basically falls unconscious for some time until the very next morning when a storm has passed, the rain stopped falling, the lightning and thunder are barely noticeable, and he is able to successfully get up and realize that he is now on a certain island, pretty much uncharted. So, right off the bat, he definitely has something that he needs to figure out, and quickly. And if he's looking for help, it almost does seem that there's little to no hope for anything like that. He essentially looks around for a bit, realizes that there's no way out, and he begins to create a giant help on the beach. At first with the sand, but eventually when it washes away, he starts gathering a bunch of rocks and setting them along to create the word help. Essentially, a common usage of an SOS signal to signal to nearby aircraft or even other vessels that someone is trapped on the island and needs rescuing immediately. However though, as time passes, hours turn to days, days turn into weeks, and after some time goes along, he eventually realizes he's going to have to make the most of it. Learn how to adapt and survive on the island itself. He finds out that coconuts are apparently around, and he basically uses them as a form of nutrition. And he also goes in and finds a bunch of lost packages that also wash ashore, clearly from that same plane wreck. Eventually, he finds out that the raft could also be useful for various things as well, and even then, a number of other things end up going wrong for him, such as trying to find a way off the island. It turns out that the waves actually get more intense and more impressively large as he goes further out into sea, especially when he finds out that there is actually a light in the distance, clearly a series of rescue ships that were dispatched in order to find him, as well as the other crew members that were aboard the plane that day. Well, even though he goes so far to retrieve a fellow crew member's flashlight as well as shoes and bury the body and carve on a stone the dates of 1950 to 1995, confirming that Albert Miller died at 45 years old, possibly from the likes of drowning. Like I said though, The whole thing about this supposed rescue goes wrong for him. As he makes his way onto the raft, which is partially deflated after it hits something on the way to the shore, he basically finds out he has no way to counteract against those giant waves that are basically out there. And if that's not enough, he ends up stabbing himself in the thigh with a giant coral, and the raft itself is now completely deflated because it hits even more coral as it washes ashore once again along with him. So he ends up bleeding profusely, having to grab a piece of fabric to create a tourniquet in a way. He basically passes more time and eventually being forced to open those packages that clearly were not mailed to him, and it's normally considered a federal violation to open other people's mail. Yet he does this anyways, because what other choice does he have in the matter? But the biggest, most important piece of the story of all is the fact that he actually comes across a Wilson volleyball. Yes. Because while he's trying to assemble Kindle, while he's trying to assemble some kindling for a fire that he's attempting to make, he frustratingly tries to get it to ignite, ends up slicing his hand, and then just throws a huge fit. That alone is unbelievable, but what helps make it even more interesting is the fact that his bloodied hand actually touches the volleyball. He essentially creates a large handprint of his own blood on the volleyball itself, eventually creating eyes and a mouth for it. Yes, this basically becomes his own companion that he establishes while he's on the island. A castaway, like the title says. But then, of course, comes the real kicker. He apparently was supposed to have a dental visit at some point to fix up something that went wrong with one of his teeth. He unfortunately does not have anything dental relative. Unless he grabs an ice skate while residing inside of a small cave that he was able to find while on the island itself, as well as a rock that he finds as well. The unthinkable basically happens from there. Skate goes into the tooth, rock hits the skate, and knocks the tooth out of its roots, causing him to suffer extreme pain and eventually shock, leading him to go unconscious for some time. But this is basically where we jump skip through a large portion of time, more specifically 4 years into the future. Basically, in the year 2000, he essentially is still a member of that one island that still remains uncharted, even though he could technically be considered the man to have explored this island. By this point, it should come as no surprise that he basically went through all that effort, a lot of coconuts, and a lot of other things in life, basically to create a home for himself. His hair, both on the head and face, grow exponentially, revealing he likely will remain a member for a long time. But even so, he still doesn't give up. He was able to create fire on his own, and even utilize the nutritional value of crab meat. As he finds crabs on the shores as well as some fish, creates fires to cook them, and then basically enjoys them. But then, of course, it's apart from the skill of him being able to catch fish and cook them by creating fire, and then of course from him having other skills as well that he developed during his time. He eventually finds a way to find time. Yes, as a means of killing time, he basically creates a lot of writings on the cave. Mainly the calendars, the clocks, the means to find out time, and various other things out there. He even finds out how seasons are able to come and go thanks to his notions of looking towards the sun from various cracks and holes within the cave itself and find out where the sun's position is, so that way he can actually determine what point in history is he in. Is he in fall, winter, summer, spring? Is he at night? Is he in day? Is he at a certain point in the week? He basically keeps track of all of these things thanks to cave writings. So, all of that is just amazing. So, this definitely goes how much development we've seen of this character, and why this probably is one of Tom Hanks' best performances to date. But even then, he still doesn't give up on finding a way back. Despite the raft being destroyed, despite the waves being overpowered for him, and despite Wilson being the only known companion he could possibly find, again, he does not give up. He is in fact able to, believe it or not, create an entire raft with wood, thatch, rope, and even the VHS tapes themselves that he finds in one package. Yeah, basically speaking, VHS tapes and the exact analog tape that's used within each VHS cassette actually does help to offer to keep the raft nice and steady. And eventually he creates a dock for it in which he slides it into the water and it's all ready to go. It also comes with its own set of porta potty bits. Yeah, you probably didn't notice. But there was actually a Bakersfield based porta potty wall that just so happened to wash ashore just the same as with all these other items he's found as well. And then of course, Albert Miller's corpse. But the thing is, it was this point that he basically found the motivation to finally get back to work on trying to figure out a way off the island for good and get reunited with his wife Kelly. So, in that regard, the following day, after a bit of a heated argument went down between him and Wilson, conscientiously he knew that he would have to stick with him the entirety of the way. Wilson would come along with him, some food would be packed, and then of course, a sail would be mounted, not of which of course were the walls of that porta potty from Bakersfield. And so, in the entirety of these different things that go down, he eventually is able to successfully get off this island. Yeah, paddles his way through, gets through those giant waves, and once he realizes that he is now off the island for good, he keeps pushing forward. He keeps making his way through, paddles his way through alongside his custom raft with Wilson by his side, and with the hopes that he might eventually find company nearby. Probably in the form of a ship of some sort. But of course, eventually more challenges start to come underway. A giant storm hits once again, kind of reminiscent to when he crash landed with that plane. And eventually, the raft would end up falling apart. The whales would also start to come by, and worst of all, at one point where he falls asleep, Wilson ends up getting lost. And it becomes a very emotional moment for him. A companion of his is now washed away, and he's unable to reach him. This is certainly something that does resonate with us, because Wilson was as close to being an actual living person that he could have actually socialized with. But it is a common thing to have, even when we are in social times, because you never know what could happen. And as we are considered social creatures, the likelihood of us being lonely for long periods of time will certainly drive us mad by all means. Even by his standards, there just isn't any showing that he wanted to let Wilson go, despite being angry with him before. But anyways, Wilson's now lost, the whales come around. Eventually, this is where we see a cargo ship pass by. And the fact that he's asleep the entire time, that's unbelievable that he would sleep through it. But thankfully the whales help wake him up to realize that there is a ship nearby, and he basically raises his arm to let him know that he's right there. And while we don't exactly see what happens from there, it cuts to the scene where he's on a plane yet again. So this just confirms he was indeed rescued. He had a huge tan throughout that whole time he was out there. He is now in regular clothes, his hair is trimmed, his beard is shaved, and more importantly, he is now on the way back home. Yep. So as exciting as this might sound to some people, to him, it's quite different. Knowing how he had to adapt as a means of survival alongside that island, coming back home to eventually find crab legs at a party technically gave him the firm reminder that making fire and killing crabs in order to eat their meat for nutritional value tends to be a different feeling for him nowadays. I guess you could say he's looking at the thing differently than how he used to. But even then, he still doesn't want to take nothing for granted. Because now that he's back home, he can get reunited with Kelly, and she's even more shocked to know that he's actually alive. Yeah. But it gets even more crazier from here because by the end of the movie, Nolan shows up at his own house with Kelly still inside as well. But he had to get there by taxi because his Jeep had to be given out since he had to board that plane in order to get home. But basically, after some talks went down between him and Kelly about what had happened out there, especially when he got off that island, he went hundreds of miles before being picked up by that ship. And even more so, the big picture here is that he is now reunited with his Jeep. Yep, she kept it in the garage just for him to eventually come back to once he got home. And now that he is, even years had passed, well, I guess you could say, we sort of have a happy ending here. Well, it still isn't quite over yet. Because just as we saw in the opening scene where a FedEx van was going down the road out towards a barn where a metal crafter was around, well, guess what? Chuck Nolan makes a run to that exact address where one package that he still had with him continued to be. It proved once and for all that despite a number of things that might go wrong with FedEx, the packages shall always be delivered. This does technically give me similar feels to when packages have been around for long periods of time without being delivered, but eventually, after some crazy stories go around, the delivery is actually made to the right address and to the right people whom ordered them in the first place. And so, after Nolan drops the package off, he makes his way back out, comes across the owner of the property, has a little exchange with her, and well, we can only tell that she is relieved to have seen him once again. And even more importantly, we can only guess that the message that he wrote on the box to let her know that package saved his life, it only is a good confirmation that perhaps he might be able to move on from Kelly. After all, she had moved on from him a long time ago. So it only makes sense that he would have to start anew at those crossroads, starting on that very day in the year 2000. And overall, I will say, this was quite a film to watch, and I certainly had even more worth talking about here compared to other films I've talked here on this channel, and in this series in particular. But still, it was quite an impressive piece that Tom Hanks and Robert Zemeckis collaborated together in order to bring us. And while this isn't considered as great as what we've seen from the likes of Back to the Future, for instance, from Robert Zemeckis, nor would this be as great of a film that Tom Hanks was in contrast to what we saw from Turner and Hooch, The Money Pit, Toy Story, and some others here and there, it still is a great thing for us to have around. I remember that I rented it from the library at one point well over a decade ago. I really enjoyed it, and I also saw it again during middle school as part of a project. And then of course there were several more times that I have seen it since then, including the more recent thing from when it was free, like I said earlier. But still, it's definitely worth rewatching many times over, because it gives us a lot of emotional moments, a lot of means to adapt in certain circumstances, and most importantly, finding your way back home when you happen to have come across a certain predicament that may have come up unintentionally. Then, of course, there is the value of time. After all, as I've said earlier, Chuck Noland was a man who wanted to keep track of time and ensure that FedEx does not fall behind on package delivery rates or otherwise. Whether it's in Memphis, Nikolaya, or other places around the world, you can expect your FedEx package to come around much faster nowadays, thanks to many computerized implementations and innovations that have been made 24 years later. So, with that in mind, thank you very much for watching this piece, and I'll come around again with some more of this content.
Whatever I want, I usually get, and I'm thinking I want you, but I don't have you yet. I ain't got no tricks to be playing on you.